The massive space station stretched across the void like a glittering city among the stars. Galactic Unity Station was the largest structure ever built by multiple species working together. Today, it hosted something that had never happened before in the galaxy's history, the Interspecies Mating Festival. Jiwoo pressed his face against the observation window of the human transport ship. His breath fogged the glass as he stared at the incredible sight. Ships of every shape and size filled the space around the station. Some looked like floating crystals that sparkled with inner light. Others resembled massive sea creatures with flowing tentacles. A few were so strange that Jiwoo couldn't even guess what their builders might look like. "Amazing, isn't it?" Hyeon said, joining him at the window. The older man wore the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. "Hard to believe we're really here. Hundreds of species," Jiwoo whispered, "all coming together to find mates and make alliances." As a xenobiologist, he had dreamed of this moment since childhood. Earth had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago, and this was their first invitation to the festival. Minji looked up from her recording equipment. The cultural anthropologist had been documenting everything since they left Earth's orbit. "The data we'll gather here will keep researchers busy for decades," she said with excitement. Their ship docked with a soft bump. The airlock hissed open, and the 3 humans stepped into a corridor filled with beings from across the galaxy. Jiwoo's eyes widened as he saw his first real aliens up close. A group of tall, thin creatures with crystalline skin walked past. Their bodies caught the station's lights and threw rainbow patterns on the walls. Behind them came beings that looked like walking trees, their bark-like skin rough and brown, tiny flowers blooming along their arms. "The crystal people are prism folk," Hyun said quietly, reading from his datapad. "The tree beings are Verdani. According to our briefings, they're already showing interest in each other." They made their way to the main festival hall. The space was enormous, easily the size of 10 football fields. Colorful banners hung from the ceiling, each representing a different species. Booths and pavilions filled the floor, where aliens displayed their culture, technology, and available members looking for mates. Music filled the air, or what passed for music. Some of it sounded like whale songs, others like wind chimes, and some like nothing Jiwoo had ever heard. The smells were just as varied, from sweet flower scents to sharp, metallic odors to things that made his nose wrinkle. "Look at that," Minji said, pointing to a group of blue-skinned beings with gills on their necks. They were performing some kind of water dance with beings made of what looked like living clouds. "The tidal swimmers and the ether-born. They're from completely different environments, but they're finding common ground." Jiwoo watched in fascination as the aquatic aliens created water shapes in the air, while their cloud-like partners formed, matching patterns with their misty bodies. Other species had gathered to watch, clicking, chirping, and humming in what seemed like approval. Everywhere they looked, connections were forming. The hive-minded collective, who looked like walking. Insects were deep in conversation with the silicon mines, robots with glowing blue eyes. Even species that seemed completely different were finding ways to communicate and bond. "Earth's booth is over there," Hyeon said, leading them through the crowd. They passed pavilions decorated with everything from floating lights to hanging crystals to what looked like miniature planets. The human pavilion looked simple compared to the others, but it was filled with curious aliens. Jiwoo smiled as he watched his fellow humans explaining Earth culture, showing videos of human cities and offering samples of Earth food. "Not bad for newcomers," a voice said behind them. They turned to see Captain Rodriguez, the head of the human delegation. "Several species have already expressed interest in cultural exchanges. The Verdani are fascinated by our agricultural techniques." "What about actual mating connections?" Minji asked. "A few possibilities," Rodriguez replied. "The humanoid species seem most interested, which makes sense, but we'll see." As they talked, a hush fell over part of the Great Hall. Jiwoo looked toward the commotion and saw a procession entering through one of the main gates. Tall figures in dark robes walked in perfect formation, surrounding someone in the center. "Who are they?" Jiwoo asked. Rodriguez checked his datapad and frowned. "Shadowkin. I didn't expect them to come." The procession moved closer, and the crowd parted before them. The robed figures pulled back their hoods, revealing pale, beautiful faces with sharp features and eyes like starlight. But it was the figure in the center who took Jiwoo's breath away. She was clearly their queen. Her skin was like moonlight, perfect and smooth. Her hair fell like liquid shadow down her back. She wore robes that seemed to be made of darkness itself, shifting and moving like living night. Her eyes, when they passed over the crowd, held the weight of centuries. "Queen Nara," Rodriguez said quietly. "Ruler of the Umbral Empire. Her people are, well, they're vampires. They feed on life essence." The queen's entourage set up their pavilion in a space that had been left empty. Other species booths surrounded it. But as soon as the Shadowkin began unpacking their displays, the neighboring aliens started moving away. Jiwoo watched as the crystal-skinned prism folk quickly packed up their booth and relocated to the other side of the hall. The tree-like Verdani actually uprooted themselves and walked away, leaving deep holes in the floor. "That's not very welcoming," Minji said with a frown. "Can you blame them?" Hyun asked. Vampires aren't exactly known for being good partners. But Jiwoo kept watching. The Shadowkin set up their display with quiet dignity. Their technology was clearly advanced. Their equipment moved by itself, setting up complex holographic displays, showing beautiful cities under eternal night skies. Their art was stunning, all flowing lines and captured starlight. Queen Nara stood in the center of it all, watching other species avoid her people with an expression of resigned sadness. No one approached their booth. No one asked questions about their culture. The few aliens who looked in their direction quickly turned away when they saw the queen watching. "She looks lonely," Jiwoo said. "She looks dangerous," Hyun replied. "Those are the eyes of a predator." But Jiwoo saw something else in those ancient eyes. He saw intelligence, sadness, and a hope that was slowly dying as the festival continued around them, leaving the vampire queen and her people completely alone. The first day of the festival ended with celebration as multiple species announced new partnerships. The Prism folk and Verdani had indeed formed an alliance. The water beings and cloud beings had created something they called a flow bond. Even some of the more unusual species had found connections, but the Shadowkin pavilion remained empty, of visitors, an island of isolation in a sea of new friendships. Queen Nara stood at the edge of her booth, looking out at the celebrations with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to expect disappointment. Jiwoo found himself unable to look away from her, wondering what stories lay behind those ancient lonely eyes. The second day of the festival brought more excitement and more connections between species. Jiwoo woke early and made his way to the observation deck to watch the sunrise through the station's massive windows. The view was breathtaking. Dozens of alien ships floating against a backdrop of distant stars and colorful nebulae. He wasn't alone on the deck. Queen Nara stood at the far end, her dark robes making her look like a shadow against the bright starfield. She held herself with perfect posture, but Jiwoo could see something defeated in the way her shoulders curved slightly inward. Jiwoo wanted to approach her, but before he could move, a group of Stellar Imperium warriors entered the observation deck. These aliens looked almost human, but larger and stronger with bronze skin and proud bearing. Their leader, a massive figure with ritual scars covering his arms, spotted Queen Nara and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Even here, the Deathbringer pollutes the air," he said in heavily accented Galactic Common. No wonder the stars seemed dimmer today. Queen Nara turned slightly but said nothing. Her face remained perfectly calm, showing no reaction to the insult. "Commander Zetal," one of his followers said, "perhaps we should find another deck." "Why? Should we leave?" Zetal replied. "We are not the ones who feast on the life force of others. We are not the ones whose very presence brings fear to peaceful beings." Jiwoo felt anger building in his chest. He stepped forward, but Queen Nara's voice stopped him. "You are correct, Commander," she said, her voice like silk over steel. "Your presence brings no fear at all, merely disappointment." The vampire. Queen walked past the warriors with elegant grace, never looking back as she left the observation deck. Zetal's face turned red with anger, but he made no move to follow her. Later that morning, Jiwoo found his human colleagues at their booth. The pavilion was busy with alien visitors asking questions about Earth culture and technology. Hyun was deep in conversation with a group of floating jellyfish-like beings called the Drift Swimmers. Any luck with partnerships? Jiwoo asked Minji, during a quiet moment. She shook her head sadly. The more advanced species think we're too primitive. The aggressive ones think we're too weak. And the peaceful ones worry that we're too violent because of our history. What about you, Hyun? Jiwoo asked when his friend finished his conversation. Hyun's expression was grim. Commander Zaytal and his people rejected our proposal outright. He said humans are barely evolved apes, who have only been in space for a few centuries. According to him, true partnerships require species that have proven themselves over thousands of years. Jiwoo looked around the festival hall. More species were announcing partnerships every hour. The insect-like collective had formed a complex multi-bond with 3 different machine species. A group of energy beings had somehow partnered with rock creatures from a high-gravity world. Even the most unusual combinations seemed to work, but not everyone was finding success. Besides the humans, several other species wandered the hall, looking lonely and rejected. The Thoughtweavers, who communicated through telepathy, couldn't find anyone willing to let them into their minds. The Phase Shifters, who could become invisible at will, scared other species who worried about being watched in secret. And then there were the Shadowkin. Jiwoo watched Queen Nara move through the festival with her entourage. Wherever they went, conversations stopped. Aliens found excuses to leave. Even species that seemed friendly to everyone else grew cold and distant when the vampires approached. During lunch, Jiwoo overheard a conversation between 2 crystalline beings. I heard they drink blood, one said, her voice like wind chimes. Worse than that, replied the other. They steal your very soul. Once they feed on you, you become their slave forever. I heard they can control your mind just by looking at you. And they live forever, so they collect slaves from every species they meet. Jiwoo knew these had to be myths and legends, but they were being spoken as facts. He pulled out his datapad and started researching what little information was available about the Shadowkin Empire. What he found surprised him. The Shadowkin had never invaded another world. Their empire had grown through trade and mutual defense agreements. Their technology was among the most advanced in the galaxy, particularly in medicine and energy systems. They had even shared some of their life extension techniques with allied species. Most interesting of all, there was no record of the Shadowkin ever keeping slaves or controlling other beings' minds. Every account of interaction with them suggested they were actually very respectful of other species' independence. That afternoon, Jiwoo watched as Queen Nara attempted to join a discussion about medical advances. The group included doctors and healers from a dozen species, all sharing knowledge about treating diseases and injuries. My people have developed techniques for healing at the cellular level, Queen Nara said, stepping into the conversation. We might be able to offer insights into life force regeneration. The immediate silence was painful to watch. One by one, the doctors found excuses to leave. Within minutes, Queen Nara stood alone in the medical pavilion, her offer of help rejected without consideration. Later, she tried to join a cultural exchange where species were sharing art, music, and literature. Again, the group dissolved as soon as she approached. Her attempts to discuss Shadowkin poetry and philosophy fell on deaf ears as aliens scattered like leaves in the wind. By evening, Queen Nara had stopped trying. She stood in her pavilion, surrounded by beautiful displays of Shadowkin culture and technology that no one would look at. Her guards remained at attention, but Jiwoo could see the sadness in their eyes too. The day ended with another celebration of new partnerships. The announcements went on for hours as species after species declared new bonds and alliances. The Prism folk and Verdani had even begun discussing creating hybrid communities where crystal and plant could live together. But the Shadowkin pavilion remained empty. Queen Nara watched the celebrations from a distance, her expression carefully neutral. Only someone looking closely would notice the slight tremble in her hands or the way her eyes tracked each happy couple with barely concealed longing. Jiwoo found himself thinking about her as he returned to his quarters. Here was a being who had ruled an empire for centuries, who commanded advanced technology and vast resources, who by all accounts led her people with wisdom and strength. Yet she stood alone, rejected not for anything she had done, but for what others imagined she might do. He thought about the myths and rumors he had heard, blood-drinking soul-stealers who controlled minds and kept slaves. But the reality seemed very different from the legend. The queen he had observed was dignified, intelligent, and respectful. Her people were clearly advanced and civilized. Jiwoo settled into bed. He wondered how many other beings were being judged by fear and prejudice rather than truth. The festival was supposed to bring species together, but it seemed like some barriers were too strong to cross. Outside his window, the lights of the alien ships continued to twinkle like stars, but Jiwoo found himself thinking about the darkness between them, and the lonely figure who ruled over shadows, waiting for someone brave enough to look beyond the fear and see the truth underneath. On the third day of the festival, Jiwoo made a decision that would change everything. Instead of joining his colleagues at the human pavilion, he spent the morning in the station's library, researching everything he could find about the Shadowkin Empire. The more he read, the more convinced he became that the fears surrounding Queen Nara's people were based on misunderstanding. The Shadowkin had made first contact with the galaxy over 2,000 years ago. In all that time, they had never started a war, never enslaved another species, never even conquered a single world through force. Their need for life essence was real, but the details were fascinating from a biological perspective. They didn't drain life from unwilling victims like the stories claimed. Instead, they required small amounts of bioelectric energy that could be freely given by any living being without harm. Modern Shadowkin had even developed synthetic alternatives that reduced their need for natural sources. Most importantly, the process of sharing life essence created a temporary empathic bond between the giver and receiver. This made forced feeding not just harmful to the victim, but actually painful for the Shadowkin. They were literally incapable of hurting someone without hurting themselves. Armed with this knowledge, Jiwoo made his way to the observation deck where he had seen Queen Nara that first morning. She was there again, standing alone at the far window, watching the ships come and go in the void outside. This time, he didn't hesitate. He walked across the deck and stopped a respectful distance away. "Your Majesty," he said, giving a slight bow. "I'm Jiwoo, from the Earth delegation. I was wondering if I might ask you some questions about Shadowkin biology." Queen Nara turned to look at him, and for a moment, Jiwoo saw surprise flicker across her ancient features. She had probably not expected anyone to approach her, let alone a human asking about science rather than running away in fear. "You are not afraid," she said. It wasn't a question, but she sounded curious. "Should I be?" Jiwoo replied. "From what I've read, your people are no more dangerous than any other species here. Perhaps less so, given your empathic feeding process." Something shifted in Queen Nara's expression. The careful mask of royal indifference slipped slightly, revealing genuine interest. "You have researched my people," she said. "That is unusual." "I'm a xenobiologist," Jiwoo explained. "I study alien life forms. The Shadowkin evolutionary path is fascinating. How did your species develop the ability to process bioelectric energy? Is it related to your extended lifespans?" For the first time since the festival began, Queen Nara smiled. It transformed her entire face, making her look less like an untouchable ruler and more like someone who had just received an unexpected gift. "You really want to know?" she said, wonder in her voice. They talked for over an hour. Queen Nara explained how her people had evolved on a world with very little sunlight, where traditional photosynthesis was impossible. They had developed the ability to share and process bioelectric energy as a survival mechanism, creating small communities bound together by literal life connections. "The feeding creates understanding," she said, her eyes distant with memory. "When life essence is freely shared, both beings experience each other's emotions, thoughts, even memories for a brief time. It makes lying impossible, hatred difficult, and cruelty painful for both parties." That's incredible, Jiwoo said. It's like biological empathy enforcement. Yes, Queen Nara said, her smile returning. It is why my people prize honesty and emotional connection above all things. We cannot survive without trust. As they talked, Jiwoo learned more about the queen herself. She had ruled for over 800 years, watching civilizations rise and fall while remaining eternally apart from them. The loneliness in her voice was heartbreaking when she spoke about watching friends grow old and die while she remained unchanged. Immortality is not the gift most beings think it is, she said quietly. I have loved and lost more times than I can count. Eventually you learn to keep your distance. It hurts less. But you came to this festival, Jiwoo pointed out. You must have hoped for something different. Queen Nara was quiet for a long moment. Hope is a dangerous thing, she said finally. But yes, I hoped. I thought perhaps in a gathering dedicated to bringing species together, someone might look past the fear and see. She trailed off. See what? See that even queens get lonely, she whispered. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Hyun and Minji, who had been looking for Jiwoo. Both humans stopped short when they saw him talking with the vampire queen. Jiwoo, Hyun said carefully. We need to discuss the afternoon's cultural presentations. Queen Nara immediately stepped back, her royal mask sliding back into place. Of course, she said formally. I should not keep you from your duties. Wait, Jiwoo said, but she was already walking away, her dark robes flowing behind her like liquid shadow. Are you crazy? Minji hissed once the queen was gone. Do you know what people are saying about her? I know what they're saying, Jiwoo replied. The question is whether any of it's true. He spent the rest of the day thinking about their conversation. That evening, he found Queen Nara in the station's botanical garden, a vast space filled with plants from hundreds of worlds. She stood among the earth roses, her pale fingers barely touching the red petals. They remind me of home, she said without turning around. We had flowers that bloomed in eternal twilight. Beautiful, but they never felt the warmth of a sun. Like your people, Jiwoo said, understanding. Yes. She faced him, and in the garden's soft light she looked more human than alien. You came back. Why? Because I think you're the most interesting person I've met at this entire festival, Jiwoo said honestly, and because I don't think you're nearly as dangerous as everyone believes. I am dangerous, Queen Nara said, but there was no threat in her voice. I could drain your life force in seconds. I could live inside your mind, experience your memories, know your deepest secrets. Could you? Jiwoo asked, stepping closer. Or would that hurt you as much as it hurt me? Queen Nara stared at him in shock. You do understand? She breathed. I understand that you're afraid, Jiwoo said gently. Not of hurting others, but of being hurt yourself. Every time you tried to connect with someone here, they rejected you. That has to be painful for someone whose biology is built around emotional connection. For a moment, the ancient queen looked like she might cry, but then she straightened, her royal composure returning. You should be careful, human Jiwoo, she said. Hope is dangerous for my kind. And disappointment. Disappointment can last for centuries. She walked away again, but this time Jiwoo heard something different in her voice. Not dismissal, but warning. She wasn't trying to get rid of him. She was trying to protect him from the pain she had learned to expect. As he watched her disappear into the shadows between the alien plants, Jiwoo realized that Queen Nara wasn't just lonely. She was terrified of not being lonely anymore because every connection she had ever made had eventually ended in loss. But humans, Jiwoo thought with growing determination, were very good at doing things that terrified them. It was one of their best qualities. The final day of the festival arrived with great ceremony. The morning began with successful partnerships being announced over the station's communication system. Species after species declared their new bonds, describing the benefits and possibilities their connections would bring to both civilizations. Jiwoo listened to the announcements while getting dressed in his formal uniform. The Prism folk and Verdani had formed what they called a growth alliance, combining crystal technology with plant-based healing. The aquatic tidal swimmers and the cloud-like etherborn had created something called a weather partnership, planning to terraform worlds together. Even some of the more unusual combinations had worked out. The machine-like silicon minds had bonded with the insect collective, creating a hybrid consciousness that was part artificial intelligence and part hive mind. It sounded incredible, if slightly terrifying. But there had been no announcement about. The Shadowkin Jiwoo made his way to the festival hall, which was decorated for the final ceremony. Banners from successful partnerships hung from the ceiling, their colors bright against the metallic walls. Stages had been set up where the new couples would present themselves to the entire gathering. He found his fellow humans near their pavilion. Hyun looked pleased with himself while Minji seemed excited about something. "Good news," Hyun said when he saw Jiwoo. "The Verdani have agreed to a cultural exchange program. They want to learn about Earth agriculture and they're willing to share their healing techniques. And the drift swimmers are interested in Earth's ocean systems," Minji added. "It's not a full partnership, but it's a beginning. What about you?" Hyun asked. "Any progress with potential connections?" Jiwoo glanced across the hall toward the Shadowkin pavilion. Queen Nara stood with her guards, watching other species prepare for their presentations. She wore formal robes that seemed to be made of starlight and shadow, beautiful but somehow sad. "I'm working on something," Jiwoo said. Before Hyun could ask what he meant, the ceremony began. A floating platform rose in the center of the hall, and representatives from the station's governing council took their places. The head counselor, a tall being with skin like polished silver, called for attention. "Welcome, friends, to the final ceremony of the Interspecies Mating Festival," the counselor announced. "Today we celebrate the bonds formed between our peoples, connections that will strengthen the galaxy for generations to come." One by one, the new partnerships took the stage. The crystal people and tree beings created a stunning display as their crystals caught and reflected the light from tiny flowers that bloomed along the Verdani's arms. The water and cloud beings performed a dance that made rain fall upward in impossible spirals. Each presentation was more amazing than the last. The crowd cheered and celebrated as species after species showed off their new bonds. The energy in the hall was electric with excitement and hope for the future. But Jiwoo noticed something else. As each partnership was announced, subtle comments began to surface from various species about the natural order of compatibility. The Silver Counselor spoke about how some beings naturally complement each other, while others were perhaps meant to remain independent. Then came a moment that made Jiwoo's blood boil. The bronze-skinned Commander Zetel of the Stellar Imperium took the platform. "This festival has shown us the beauty of proper connections," he declared, his voice carrying across the hall. "When compatible species unite, they create strength. But we must also recognize that some beings carry inherent risks. Some species are simply too dangerous for peaceful alliance." His eyes swept across the hall and settled on Queen Nara. The message was clear to everyone present. "The safety of our civilizations must come first," Zetel continued. "We cannot allow fear of hurting feelings to override common sense. Some creatures are predators by nature, no matter how they present themselves." Murmurs of agreement rippled through parts of the crowd. Jiwoo saw Queen Nara's shoulders tense, but her expression remained perfectly calm. Her guards moved slightly, closer to her, their own faces carefully controlled. The crystalline chancellor of the Prism Folk stepped forward next. "Commander Zetal speaks wisdom," she said, her voice like chiming bells. "This festival has shown us that natural compatibility cannot be forced. Those who remain unbonded perhaps do so for the good of all." More agreement from the crowd. Jiwoo felt sick as he realized what was happening. The successful species were essentially declaring that anyone who hadn't found a partner was somehow defective or dangerous. Queen Nara began to move toward the exit, her dignity intact, but her defeat obvious. Several other unbonded species were also leaving, their heads down in shame. Jiwoo couldn't stand it anymore. "Wait," he called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The entire hall fell silent. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species turned to look at the young human who had dared to interrupt the ceremony. Jiwoo's heart pounded as he stepped forward, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "I have something to announce," he said. "The ceremony is for confirmed partnerships only," the Silver Counselor said with obvious irritation. "Then this qualifies," Jiwoo replied. He walked to the center of the hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Queen Nara had stopped near the exit, her ancient eyes wide with shock as she stared at him. "My name is Jiwoo of Earth," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "and I formally request to bond with Queen Nara of the Shadowkin Empire." The silence that followed was deafening. Then came an explosion of voices as representatives from dozens of species began talking at once. Most of it was protest and shock. "Impossible," Commander Zettel shouted. "The humans are too naive to understand what they're doing." "This is madness," the Crystal Chancellor added. "They'll doom themselves to slavery or worse." "Someone must stop this," called out another voice, "for their own good." But Jiwoo ignored the chaos around him. He walked directly to Queen Nara, who stood frozen in disbelief. "You said hope was dangerous," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "But humans are pretty good at dangerous things." "Jiwoo, no," she whispered. "You don't understand what you're offering. The political consequences alone will destroy your species' chances here." "Maybe," Jiwoo said, "but I've spent 3 days watching the most interesting, intelligent, and kind person at this entire festival being treated like a monster because of ignorant fears. I won't stand by and let that continue." Queen Nara's carefully controlled expression finally cracked. For just a moment, 800 years of loneliness showed in her eyes. "I could hurt you," she said desperately. "My people's bonding process involves sharing life essence. It's intimate in ways your species might not understand. You could lose yourself in my mind and my memories. Centuries of experiences could overwhelm you. Or," Jiwoo said, reaching out his hand to her, "we could share something beautiful that no one in this room has ever experienced." The hall had gone quiet again, everyone straining to hear their conversation. Queen Nara stared at his outstretched hand like it was both her greatest hope and her greatest fear. "Think about what you're doing," Hyun called out from across the hall. "The diplomatic consequences will be whatever they are," Jiwoo interrupted, never taking his eyes off Queen Nara. "Some things are more important than politics." Behind Queen Nara, her guards had moved closer, their faces showing emotions Jiwoo hadn't seen before. Hope, wonder, and something that looked like pride in their human ally. "You would do this?" Queen Nara asked. "Knowing what others will think, what they might do to your people because of it?" "Your Majesty," Jiwoo said with a smile, "I'm human. We specialize in doing the right thing even when it's stupid." For the first time since the festival began, Queen Nara laughed. The sound was like music, beautiful and free and full of genuine joy. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. The moment their skin touched, Jiwoo felt something he had never experienced before. It was like electricity, but warm and alive. He could sense Queen Nara's emotions, her amazement, her gratitude, and underneath it all, a deep well of affection that had been waiting 800 years to find someone to trust it with. "I accept your bond offer, Jiwoo of Earth," Queen Nara said formally, her voice carrying across the silent hall. The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and intense, but for the first time, not all of it was negative. Some species were shouting in protest, but others were talking excitedly about this unprecedented development. And in the center of it all, a human and a vampire queen stood hand in hand, looking at each other like they had just discovered something wonderful that no one else in the galaxy had ever found. The chaos in the Great Hall continued for several minutes after Jiwoo's announcement. Representatives from dozens of species shouted over each other, some in outrage, others in excitement, and a few in what sounded like fear. Commander Zettel of the Stellar Imperium pushed through the crowd toward the human delegation. "This cannot be allowed," he declared, his bronze face flushed with anger. "The human is clearly under some form of mental influence. The vampire witch has already begun her control over him." "That's ridiculous," Minji shot back, surprising everyone. including herself with her fierce tone. Jiwoo made his own choice, a choice based on ignorance, the crystalline chancellor added, her bell-like voice sharp with disapproval. Humans are too young a species to understand the dangers they face. We must protect them from themselves. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his diplomatic training taking over. With respect, Chancellor, humanity is capable of making its own decisions. However, he said, looking directly at Jiwoo, we do need to discuss the implications of this choice. The Silver Counselor called for order, and gradually the hall quieted down. The human's request has been made and accepted, he announced. According to festival law, this creates a valid bond between the species. However, there will be consequences to discuss. Over the next hour, those consequences became clear. 3 species immediately announced they were withdrawing their offers of cultural exchange with humanity. The Stellar Imperium declared that humans would not be welcome in their space. Several other species expressed grave concerns about humanity's judgment and decision-making abilities. But something else was happening too. Species that had been ignored or rejected during the festival began to pay attention to the humans. The telepathic thought weavers approached Captain Rodriguez, expressing interest in a species brave enough to look past fear. The shape-shifting phase shifters, who had been avoided by everyone else, sent a representative to discuss potential cooperation. Most surprisingly, some of the successfully bonded species also showed new respect for humanity. The Verdani elder approached Hyon privately. Your people showed courage today, the tree-like being said, tiny flowers blooming along his bark, and what Jiwoo had learned was a sign of approval. The Prism folk may fear your choice, but we understand the value of growth through unexpected connections. As the political discussions continued around them, Jiwoo and Queen Nara stood together, still holding hands. The bioelectric connection between them had not broken, and Jiwoo was beginning to understand what she had meant about sharing life essence. He could feel her emotions as if they were his own, her amazement at his acceptance, her gratitude for his courage, and underneath it all, a deep well of loneliness that was finally beginning to heal. But he could also sense her memories, flashes of the centuries she had lived, the civilizations she had watched rise and fall, the friends she had lost to time. It should have been overwhelming, but instead, it felt natural, like he was finally seeing the complete picture of someone he had only glimpsed before. Are you all right? Queen Nara asked quietly. The connection can be intense for first-time bonding. I'm fine, Jiwoo said, and realized he meant it. It's beautiful. I can feel what you feel. Remember what you remember. Is it the same for you? Yes, she said, wonder in her voice. I can experience your memories too. Your curiosity, your kindness, your determination to do what's right even when it's difficult. These are remarkable qualities. They're human qualities, Jiwoo said with a smile. Their private conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the rest of the human delegation. Captain Rodriguez, Hyon, and Minji formed a small circle around them, effectively cutting them off from the still arguing aliens. We need to talk, Rodriguez said seriously. Jiwoo, what you've done could have serious consequences for all of humanity's future relationships in the galaxy. I know, Jiwoo replied. I'm sorry if I've caused problems for everyone else. Don't apologize yet, Hyon said, surprising him. Let's see what we're really dealing with first. He turned to Queen Nara with respectful formality. Your Majesty, we need to understand exactly what this bond means. Not the political implications, but the practical ones. What does it actually involve? Queen Nara straightened, slipping into her royal role. The bioelectric bond we have formed allows us to share life essence freely. This creates an empathic connection that can be maintained across any distance. We will be able to sense each other's emotions, share memories when desired, and provide mutual support through the exchange of life energy. And the risks? Rodriguez asked bluntly. For Jiwoo, very few, Queen Nara replied honestly. The process actually strengthens his life force rather than weakening it. The shared energy flow enhances healing, extends lifespan, and provides protection against many forms of disease or injury. What about mind control? Minji asked. That seems to be everyone's main fear. Queen Nara's expression grew sad. Impossible, she said simply. The empathic connection works both ways. I cannot force Jiwoo to do anything without experiencing the pain and resistance myself. The bond makes cruelty literally painful for both parties. Then why are people so afraid of your species? Rodriguez asked. Because fear is easier than understanding, Queen Nara said. And because my people learned long ago to avoid trying to correct misconceptions. It's less painful to be alone than to be constantly rejected. The human delegation exchanged looks. Finally, Rodriguez spoke. Your Majesty, would you be willing to demonstrate the bonding process publicly? Show the other species exactly what it involves. Queen Nara looked shocked. You would ask that? Knowing it might not change their minds? We're asking, Yan said firmly, because we believe in giving people the truth and letting them make their own decisions. And, Minji added with growing excitement, because the data we could gather from observing an actual life essence bond could revolutionize our understanding of bioelectric interactions. Queen Nara turned to Jiwoo. Through their connection, he could feel her hope warring with her fear of another rejection. It's your choice, Jiwoo said gently. But I think my people deserve to see what we're really talking about here. The demonstration took place an hour later. The Great Hall had been reconfigured with monitoring equipment provided by various species. Even the critics wanted to see what actually happened during Shadowkin bonding. Jiwoo and Queen Nara stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by thousands of watching aliens. The Queen had explained that the process would involve a deeper sharing than their initial connection, allowing observers to see the actual flow of bioelectric energy between them. Are you ready? Queen Nara asked. Jiwoo nodded, then looked out at the crowd. Before we begin, I want everyone to know that I'm doing this of my own free will. No one is controlling me, no one is forcing me, and no one could stop me even if they tried. Queen Nara smiled at that, then placed her hands on either side of his face. Her skin began to glow with a soft, silvery light. The effect was immediate and visible to everyone watching. Lines of light flowed between them, creating patterns that pulsed in rhythm with their heartbeats. But instead of Jiwoo looking drained or controlled, he began to glow as well, his human life force strengthening and brightening in response to the connection. Through their bond, Jiwoo experienced 800 years of memories in the space of seconds. He saw Queen Nara as a young woman, learning to rule her people with wisdom and compassion. He witnessed the loneliness of centuries, the loss of friends to time, the gradual acceptance that she would always be alone. But he also felt her joy, in this moment, her amazement at finding someone who could see past the fear to the person underneath. And through the connection, she experienced his memories too. His childhood curiosity about the stars, his dreams of meeting alien species, his determination to judge others by their actions rather than their reputations. The demonstration lasted only a few minutes, but when it ended, the hall was completely silent. The bioelectric display had been beautiful, like watching living starlight dance between two beings who clearly cared for each other. Finally, the Verdani elder spoke. I have never seen anything like that, he said, wonder in his voice. It was not domination but cooperation, not theft but sharing. The energy readings show mutual enhancement, not depletion, added one of the drift swimmers. If anything, both beings appear stronger after the connection. Slowly, other voices joined in. Not all of them were positive. Commander Zettel and some others remained convinced that the humans were making a mistake. But many species began to reconsider their assumptions about the Shadowkin. The phase shifters, who had been rejected by everyone else, approached Queen Nara after the demonstration. Your Majesty, their leader said, if this is what true connection looks like, perhaps we have all been too quick to judge based on fear. As the evening continued, something remarkable happened. Other impossible partnerships began to form. The telepathic thought weavers found acceptance with a species that had initially feared mental intrusion. The phase shifters formed an alliance with beings who appreciated their stealth abilities rather than fearing them. The festival, which had been winding down with conventional partnerships, suddenly exploded into new possibilities as species looked